Hello and welcome back to Teppou Republic. On the last episode we ambushed a new opponent, the Matsue, attacking in Tamba province. We had a giant reinforcement army which came on and turned the ambush into a standard line battle. It was a line battle in which we won. The enemy had a melee orientated army that was destroyed, making its long advance towards us. Then we saw a single Tsu ship surrender, suspiciously giving us a decisive defeat in a slightly unfair situation. The Yonago force that has been invading towards Umi for ages was finally ambushed by Todo Takehisa's army. In the ambush it was a close quarters fight with the enemy's heavy melee troops doing damage to our line, but some super close range engagements with the rifles destroyed their armoured units and led to a victory. The situation in North Shinano got even worse than it has been recently, with millions of enemy armies swarming all over the province. I realised I needed to break the current siege being enacted by the Sunpu forces to stand any hope of surviving the future attacks that are on the way. Luckily, the enemy forces routed without really fighting. They marched all the way up to our line and then marched away. Our artillery wiped them out as they went, leaving our own forces intact, ready to face the next wave. There is no reason to fear our forces, even if they are required to occupy your homes. In this dark time, information is scarce, so allow me to provide some key information on Tsu military policy. The Tsu forces are not paid in loot and have no interest in damaging your property or harming your families. The Tsu forces always allow those who are hostile to them to surrender, even if fighting has already begun. Human life comes above all grudges or glory. The Tsu forces exist only to implement the Republican state in areas forced to resist the change. Once the change is complete, all non-essential military forces are disbanded and regions will be allowed to self-govern under magistrates of the people's choosing. I understand that there are many large and powerful interests keeping this information from you, but if you truly wish to confirm it, communicating with people within our borders will confirm these facts. I hope and plead that you will keep these facts in mind when deciding whether to remain loyal to your local warlords during the liberation of your province. Tsu welcomes all with open arms and offers forgiveness for any past hostility. Please join me in creating a new nation where the chaos of our current age can never be repeated, be it caused by our own hand or the hand of a foreign power. Here are the results from our Sally battle against the Sunpu. As you can see, we lost fewer than 100 troops, defeating over 2,000 enemies. Quite fantastic. The Parrot guns, mortars and snipers doing most of the killing. The long range aspect of that battle was the most deadly for the enemy, it seems. So this means the siege of North Shinano is broken, but of course we're just going to receive another invading force in the form of the Nagaoka very soon. But at least we haven't taken any losses from that battle, meaning we're still in an okay state to fight another one in the probably next turn. Down in Totoimi, I have Egakoji Yoshiyuji moving to the east, and I was wondering whether to send him up towards North Shinano to help out with the situation, or continue the mission I had in mind, which was to go and attack Suruga. I decided to go for the latter. I'm going to be aggressive and gamble that North Shinano can hold. I also have these forces left over from fighting the Okazaki hanging around in Owari. One of the armies, the one nearer to the city, is currently being built up, so I'm going to leave them there whilst I recruit more troops to make the army stronger. But the other stack is ready to go. The options I had were to send them west to fight with Takayuki and Takehisa, because over there we're actually quite weak, but I decided to send him towards North Shinano. That'll be my fallback option, that if North Shinano falls in the very near future, I'll have another army ready to go and attempt to retake it right away. Now I finally have the confidence in Owari to destroy the police station. This means that my realm in general is reaching the point where they accept the fact that they're a republic, so I can start destroying my republican conversion buildings and free up more slots to build more useful things, which is always good news. Now here on the border of Harima, a Takatsuki army is sitting there. It's not been ambushed by Takayuki's ambush position, and it probably would have been if it was going to be so far. So now I really need to just attack that army to prevent it from getting to Setsu. I could try and force a defense of Setsu in the castle, but the enemy will probably destroy all the infrastructure on the way, which I don't want. So I'm going to force a field battle. I'm quite confident in Takayuki's forces, so it should be okay. I'm also going to bring in the main fleet from over by Kawachi to come into naval bombardment range of the enemy force. So now Takayuki's very elite army is ready to do battle and be supported by naval artillery fire. Now, as I initiated the battle, I saw that the enemy's army is filled with melee troops and a bunch of heavy and light cavalry. I wasn't really happy about this because you can see from my army, I don't really have any anti-cavalry or anti-melee components other than just putting a line infantry line out and hoping the enemy doesn't reach it. But I didn't want to have to rely on that in this case, so I realised I could pull over these 3 groups of spear levy from the castle at Setsu to come and help out. So I'm going to get them in as reinforcements to Takayuki's army, just to slightly balance the fight out a little more and mean if the enemy gets to melee range, we're going to have a better chance. Of course, spear levy aren't all that good in melee, but I'd rather have them fighting than my missile units. So I initiate the battle. The enemy still have a small advantage, but that's okay. This enemy army, of course, was a former ally of the Todo forces. The Takatsuki were a long-term ally who turned against us towards the end of the revolutionary phase. So this will be a fairly decisive confrontation between the heads of the 2 families. We're going to avenge their betrayal, hopefully at least. It was just months ago that our families sat side by side in grand halls, talking of how our alliance would continue to dominate Kinai. Today seems like it must be some violent nightmare brought on by overeating, but regrettably the reality of this day is unbearable. I never thought Takayuki's pipe dreams would get the better of him, and I never thought he would find so much support and success if they did. Something at the back of my head tells me we should be fighting alongside him, not against. But the wishes of the Emperor cannot be ignored, even for a greater good. It is time to end this. So here's Takayuki's formation, a flat line on some fairly flat terrain. We do have a slight rise on the left side of our army, and that's where my artillery and sharpshooters are. On the extreme left we have the US Marines defending the edge of our formation with the Doshin behind them. The lack of melee units is of course the main feature of this formation, but some more melee units are now coming on in the form of those 3 groups of spear levy who I'll distribute among the back of my lines. In the meantime, my artillery are going to fire on the advancing enemy forces who are rushing their way towards us in a very disorderly way, their cavalry mixing with the infantry and being cut down with those infantry as the shrapnel shot comes in from the Parrot guns and does extreme damage to those regiments. Overall, the enemy army will lose hundreds of troops taking this fire, especially because they're going to take conventional artillery fire after this as well. They've got a long open plain to march across. As they do start marching across it, they come into some form of formation with their melee units in front and their relatively weak missile components coming in behind, and then some more melee units behind them. They've got their cavalry on the flanks, of course, and those cavalry are going to be able to do a lot of damage if they get close. Before they get into missile range of our own army, they're taking fire from those naval guns, the naval artillery bombardment. I actually called the bombardment too far forwards. I thought the enemy would move forwards faster than they did, but even so, massive artillery strikes devastate some of the enemy's regiments, and overall break up their formation. You can see they were rushing to avoid taking hits, and as a result ended up taking even more hits because of the confusion among their formation mixed their regiments together, so a hit on one became a hit on many. Their formation is now coming back into some form of order though, and making their way towards us, but as they do, they come just into range of my sharpshooters. And of course they're still in artillery range, this leading unit of Ronin taking both sniper fire and artillery fire, damaging their morale highly, and they're actually not going to get anywhere near our line before they decide to fall back and rout from the battle, and some of their other Ronin regiments nearby are going to make the same decision very soon. Doesn't bode well for the men following behind them either. They are going to go into a full charge now, rushing at a pace towards our firing line, which will start firing at their leading units, which is this thin set of Ronin, who of course are going to go down extremely easily. Their cavalry are also going to start making their move, and it's the cavalry who will do quite well against our line, because of course we don't really have anything to defend against them, just our limited spear levy, far too few of them to defend the whole line. You can see I'm sending some of these guys out in front of the line to just try and distract the cavalry, stop them from hitting my main main firing line. It works to an extent, some of their horses still get in. Here in the centre there's a unit that I'm too slow to react to, gets a very nice charge of my carbine infantry. Luckily the spears were right behind the carbine infantry, so we could stop them once they engaged. On the enemy's right flank, my cavalry attacked their cavalry to stop them from advancing. And once they were locked down, our firing line can take out the enemy's cavalry as they chase my cav away. A basic kiting tactic. The US Marines getting their first taste of battle in the Sioux army, firing against those enemy cavalry. In the centre here you can see my line is in chaos actually. They've almost broken through with their cavalry, but I'm now plugging gaps with spearmen, and I've also pulled some of my line infantry back from the line so they don't have to fight in melee, and then I can put them back into line in a moment to plug those gaps even further. On the right flank, the enemy have been pretty much wiped out at the expense of half a regiment of my own Doshin. They were fighting against superior enemy numbers, so I wasn't too worried about them taking losses, but some of the losses will be friendly fire, which is more worrying. Friendly fire happening here as well, because everyone's trying to fire at this one enemy officer fighting with all of these spearmen. The enemy officer is eventually defeated, meaning the enemy's left flank has crumbled completely. Their right flank is fighting on, whilst their centre, their line battling units, were taking fire from another naval artillery strike, which won't have been doing them any favours, and they're going to be wiped out by my actual firing line after that. The US Marines get their first taste of combat with actual samurai as the Ronin suddenly rush in and start fighting them hand to hand. Luckily, US Marines have very high melee stats, so even against these high level melee units they'll do okay, not take too many losses. Probably surprising for them to finally meet the legendary samurai in battle face to face. I'm going to back them up with some of my own spearmen attacking the enemy's Ronin from behind to rout them. I still need to finish off this firing line. It's taking extreme fire from my own gunners and won't last very long. Looks like I've finished off those Ronin very quickly there, the spearmen coming in to chase them off the field. Our US Marines actually were the units that was most culpable for inflicting friendly fire losses on my own units. They fired through a lot of my units to hit enemies, and I, in the battle itself, witnessed them kill over 50 of my own troops whilst they were attempting to fire at a shattering unit before I actually told them to stop firing entirely. So a little bit dodgy from the US Marines there. Anyway, the enemy's in full retreat except for this one unit of artillery, which for some reason is being wheeled towards the battle. It takes a hit from my own Parrot guns and surrenders, but as it surrenders my cavalry come in and wipe them out anyway. The rest of the enemy's army is being chased off the field by artillery. I didn't want to really pursue them because I'll just take even more friendly fire. It's a decisive victory for Takayuki's forces. We have inflicted a thorough revenge on the Takatsuki men who betrayed us in the past, and our army is strong enough that we have the potential to go on and capture their province of Harima, which is really the entire reason I wanted to begin engagements along this battle line anyway. Harima looks weak, perhaps it will be ours in the very near future. Let's take a look at the actual battle results and see some of the numbers. We actually lost quite a lot of men, especially compared to comparable battles happening among other armies. We did destroy the enemy army entirely, and a lot of our losses were amongst those spear levy, who of course are very easy to replace, although it sounds mean. So it's not too bad, even though the losses did look relatively high. The United States Marines and the Parrot guns leading the kills chart, which I guess is to be expected. They are our most deadly units. So the enemy army is completely defeated, a very good army to defeat as well, because it contains something like 5 of the enemy's generals, including their daimyo and his sons. So it's probably their best army. In fact, it was good that we've just wiped it out. The question now is, can we do anything with regards to taking Harima? They seem to have a small army standing in front of the castle. I decided that if I attack that army, it will just fall back into the castle. I'll be forced into a siege that I don't quite have enough movement points to go into anyway. So I thought I might as well fall back for now, replenish the many troops I lost during that battle, and try and get in a more fit state. It's probably the case that I can recover faster than the enemy can, so even if I attack Harima in 1 turn or 2 turns from now, I should still have the advantage left over from that battle. I'm going to send the navy back to raiding the enemy's trade, because that trade raiding is actually a substantial part of my income. Probably 20% of my entire income is from that raiding. Moving into the next turn, the Nagaoka and North Shinano make their move as I expected and feared. They get both their armies together to attack the castle from a southerly direction. My nearby forces don't ambush them, meaning it's going to be a straight up castle defense. The enemy army is full of saber cavalry, actually not ideal for attacking our castle, although they are still formidable fighting on foot, which means we are going to have to be very careful they don't get too close and slaughter all of our inferior melee units. This will probably be the decisive battle of North Shinano. The enemy has an advantage, but if we can win, North Shinano should be safe for at least a few turns.
While I was at the carnival, I think I changed my mind about this whole Tsu thing. I was sitting and looking about at the stalls, and I realised that what I was seeing was a mix of the best parts of our own culture with the exciting parts of what the Westerners offer. It isn't like we are totally shunning the old ways, we just leave the parts we don't need in the past. I mean, we didn't see any armed thugs there this time, but still the theatre shows and stalls were just the same as they were when I was young. I guess it set me at ease, seeing that all this revolutionary stuff doesn't mean we have to change our lives very much at all.
Here is the castle we have to defend. You can see on the minimap, the enemy are focusing their initial attack on the west part of the castle, so I'm going to have to rush my guys over there. I started in a fairly direction-neutral formation. As I was on my way over there, with some of my best infantry, these expeditionary forces, the enemy mortars started firing, wiping out a whole bunch of those expeditionary forces. Those mortars are absolutely perfect for a siege assault. You can see them down here, and because so much of the enemy's infantry and cavalry are also in this area, I can't sally out with my own cavalry to try and take out those mortars. I'm going to have to just take that mortar fire for the entire battle, which of course could be devastating. The enemy's reinforcement army is coming from a southerly direction, rushing onto the field. They're going to go straight into the attack on the south part of the castle. They're not going to be linking up with the rest of their forces. Kodama's army coming in to reinforce me is on the east part of the map. It's going to take them a while to get up to the castle, but I've told them to begin with to just get inside. They're going to run as well. They're going to expend all their energy getting inside as soon as possible because the pressure is on. I put some expeditionary forces outside the castle on the palisades to fire at the enemy's advancing infantry forces. Their infantry are in these big square formations, which actually limits the amount of guns they can have firing at any one time, which is perfect for me. I can hold them off with my forces on the wall here for a really long time in this current situation. But the enemy decided to force things to change by charging their cavalry up the ramp and into the castle. They're going to take fire as they come in, but once they're here into this inner part, they can just slaughter my expeditionary forces in melee, which of course stops them from firing at the rest of their infantry further down the hill. An ideal move from the enemy. I've moved out some of my limited numbers of spearmen to go and engage with this cavalry, but it was too late. Plus the spearmen for some reason decided to fight in a single file line, which wasn't the most efficient way to engage those cavalry. Anyway, the enemy on the south side are just about to reach the wall and begin their attack. On top of it, I have levy infantry. Obviously, they're not going to do anything to stop them. The good thing about these levy infantry, though, is that they've been drawing fire from the enemy's mortars, which is absolutely ideal. I think that is critical in how this battle goes. The fact that the enemy's mortars focused for ages on attacking my worthless levy infantry out there on that wing of the castle. Meanwhile, the enemy cavalry who attacked up the western ramp have all but been defeated, but that was just the beginning. Tons more cavalry are now going to go in and do the same thing. I noticed the enemy has so many units clumped together here that I directed my own mortars to start firing into this general area, inflicting some pretty devastating losses on these bunched enemy troops. Especially frustrating for them because their weird formation means most of them aren't even being used for firing back at me, they're just standing there and taking the fire. The same thing is happening to the cavalry, who are coming up the ramp and being engaged by my spears. The spears lock them in place, the gunners on the walls are going to cut them down with bullets. So even though those saber cavalry will actually gradually cut through my spears, they're going to take extreme losses being locked in position so close to my firing line, whilst their own firing infantry are taking extreme losses from my mortars. So overall, the situation here on the west side is becoming more and more in my favour. They still have forces yet to be committed on the west side, but I'm convinced they won't be able to get inside the castle in that area. The opposite is true here on the south side, where it seems inevitable that this massive horde of infantry is going to breach this part of the castle and has the possibility of getting from further inside. The levy infantry who were on the wall are currently being slaughtered by the saber cavalry, who they failed to stop climbing up to attack them. I'm now taking maneuvers to defend this area more heavily, putting men overlooking the area on the wall above it and sending extra troops to just stand around and get ready to lock the enemy in place down there. Unfortunately, I've attracted the attention of the enemy's mortars, who are now firing once again at my elite missile infantry, depleting my ability to hold that south side. On the west side, you can see the enemy's cavalry are now pretty much gone. They were wiped out quite quickly, and the spearmen are now very bravely rushing out to engage the remaining cavalry and some of the enemy's firing infantry. Just a few of them left. You see the massive pile of bodies. Their numbers are depleted so heavily. I was very surprised they don't fall back at this point, but I believe somewhere on the field is the enemy's daimyo, who is probably inspiring these units to stay on the field longer than they would have otherwise. The enemy's attack on the south side is beginning in earnest, being covered by mortar fire. They're charging right in with their saber cavalry. I put some expeditionary forces here purely as a sacrifice, simply to hold the enemy off, and if they get the opportunity to fire at the enemy. Some of the enemy actually got round them and now have the opportunity to climb up and attack the inner part of the castle, which is not very useful. But I do have these ninjas and carbine infantry who are in a really useless position at the moment, so I'm going to pull them back to form a second line behind this part of the wall, so any enemies who get over the wall will have to fight through a second line of infantry. Meanwhile, out on the wing, my sacrificial units have locked the enemy in place pretty well. I've got spears now holding them in place. I've pulled the expeditionary force back to form a firing line to shoot at the enemies as they come through. The enemy are still getting into melee range, but for the most part, the missile units are shooting down men as they come in, firing at them at super close range. At the same time, you can see artillery is striking their loose formations, not doing too much damage, but doing enough to reduce their morale. They still have plenty more men though, loads of them coming in up the hill, still taking fire from mortars though, so they are going to be at reduced number by the time they get inside the castle. The extra good news is that Kodama's forces have finally arrived inside the fortifications, and as they arrive, I begin redirecting them to take up positions here on the south side, because the enemy is committing everything. You can see on the minimap I actually have a detached group which was going around to attack them in the rear, but it's moving so slowly it's not going to reach them in time. The main fight is going to be decided here on this wing. These dual firing lines are engaging the enemy saber cavalry at extreme close range, gunning them down and attempting to fight them with their own swords and bayonets. It's going okay for the most part. My line is not really being violated just because the sacrificial units in front of the line are causing so much distraction for the enemy that they can't put a full-on attack against my infantry line. That distraction has now been pretty much wiped out. Just a couple of men survive. The enemy's heavy cavalry are now attacking on foot as well, so they will prove to be something very difficult to defeat in a melee fight, but by locking them in melee and then shooting them at close range, their armor will do nothing for them, so we're still going to be able to wipe them out in practice. Now my spearmen, who were fighting the enemy's cav, have even more bravely rushed to the enemy's artillery, sprinting down the hill to attack them, not worried about being attacked in the rear by the enemy's marauding cavalry in the area. Luckily, my own cavalry finally got outside the castle to engage some of the enemy's cav and just generally lock them up so they can't attack my spearmen. So we're going to knock out the enemy's artillery and cavalry in that sector, meaning we'll essentially have one out on the west part of the battlefield. Only the south part is left to win, but more and more enemy troops are now joining the battle. My mortars are reducing their morale, and the arrival of Kodama's men means that our defences in the area are inflating rapidly, and in fact we now have complete domination of this south part of the castle. The enemy can't beat us numerically. We've got men on the wall firing, all of the enemy units are routing, they're routing through my lines and being slaughtered as a result. This extremely quick rate of attrition to the enemy's army causes massive morale loss amongst all of the regiments not yet engaged or engaging elsewhere on the battlefield. A general mass rout begins to ensue. Not everyone routs, though they still have a couple of units left, but a decisive victory was declared even though two of the enemy units weren't actually routing. Possibly a slight glitch, but I think it's fair to say they were going to rout in the very near future, so I don't feel I've been cheating the AI here. It's a decisive victory for the Sioux forces. The castle has held. There were extreme casualties. We did have to use a lot of sacrifices to keep the enemy in place, particularly sacrifices of some of our elite Owari troops, which is very unfortunate. It's going to be expensive and time consuming to get them back. But the important thing is we've held North Shinano, we've bought ourselves some time to rebuild our defences. The emergency situation is over. Relief. Relief is the greatest feeling to come from all of this. If we had arrived any later, things would have gotten a whole lot trickier. But there is something about arriving at the pivotal moment in a battle that makes for a good story. Still, can't be telling the newspapers about this one. We lost too many fine soldiers today. Best to pretend that this battle never happened. One break from our stride might destroy the morale of the public. If they learn of the death toll or of how many of our troops can't sleep or eat after what they saw or what they went through, I don't think they would be sure it is all worth it. We took moderately heavy losses as expected against the Nagaoka, losing over 600 troops, 2 regiments destroyed. One of them was garrison regiment though, so not too bad at least. Kodama's men didn't fare so badly since they arrived so late, but Tananao's troops have been moderately heavily depleted, especially some of the expeditionary force who were fighting on the front line, one regiment in particular being reduced to the point of destruction, only a few soldiers left in the regiment. I'm surprised they didn't disband it after that. But North Shinano is safe, as we've said, so that is an achievement in its own right, regardless of the losses. The Yonago forces are moving deeper into Umi with their second army, though it looks like it's heading right for the ambush just like their first one did. The Sunpu move up and decide to attack North Shinano right away, not besieging the castle, but as you can see from the balance bar, they have almost no reason to be doing this. They're definitely going to lose, so I ought to resolve the assault. Unfortunately, auto-resolve likes to take your regiments without many men in them and assume you would use them on the front line, and thus further subtract even more men from them, meaning that our small regiment is deleted entirely. It's forced to disband, even though the battle itself had almost no losses whatsoever, defeating thousands of enemy troops. An absolutely perfect result that the auto-resolve gave us there. The Sunpu are wiped off the map, meaning that North Shinano is now very safe, and we didn't have to lose anything else against the Sunpu. The Edo forces are still marauding, they're making their way in. They attack the local infrastructure, damaging the economy, but the economy is already so damaged in North Shinano it's barely a problem. The Yonezawa also seem to make a move towards North Shinano. A new opponent approaches, but at least we're now in a good position to defend against them. Near Suruga, I'm moving Anagakoji Tananao's force to get in a position to move on the city. I don't want to move into their territory quite yet because I'm still regenerating troops, so I just set up an ambush on the border for this turn. I'm also moving this reserve army up towards North Shinano. It's less needed there than it was last turn, but I'm sure there's still going to be plenty of action up there. On the border of Harima, we have Takayuki's army, which now could start making a move on Harima itself. The settlement is still relatively heavily guarded. They've got a small stack of troops plus all the garrison, adding up to almost a full stack altogether, so it wouldn't be a one-sided fight if I was to attack. I decided not to advance for now. I don't want to risk anything on the western front if I don't have to, just because the western front isn't very heavily defended. The loss of one army could be disastrous. I'm going to let Takahisa just ambush this Yonago force, which looks like it's going to walk right into his ambush as it goes towards Umi. So I didn't do anything about them. I could have attacked the Yonago right away, but I'd rather just let them be ambushed. I'm pretty confident they are going to be. Now, Etchu and the area around it are pretty much on fire. That's the best way of describing it. It's been attacked by so many naval bombardments and Okazaki raiders going around destroying everything that we really need to start clearing this area up, and we finally have a military advantage, so we can start moving towards doing that. The first step is to take Noto, wiping out the Okazaki clan. They have a small army defending the city. I'm going to push them away with Takamichi, meaning that now I can attack the city itself without having to face that army simultaneously. You can see from the balance bar, this means Takamichi is guaranteed a victory, so a quick auto-resolve gives us Noto and wipes out all the remaining Okazaki forces because their clan has been destroyed. Excellent news. We've gotten rid of that thorn in our side, we've unified this general area under Su rule, and now we can start rebuilding it, getting the economy back going, and getting Takamichi to go and fight in more important fights in the future. All of this and more will be coming next time. So that's all for this episode. We'll be cleaning up our territory and looking to the next phase of the war in the next episode of Teppou Republic.